Missoula Community Access Television, located in beautiful downtown Missoula, Montana. Now, here's your host, Neil Chase.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's program. This is Baha'i Phone and Live, and tonight is Friday night at 7 o'clock here on Channel 7 at MCAT. We'll have a talk tonight, and later on you'll be able to ask questions of our speaker and myself, and phone in at the number here at the studio, which will be posted on your screen, to receive answers to your questions. But before we get into that, I've got a few points that I'd like to make tonight. And the first one is this, that everybody has a true genius. Whether it be singing, art, writing, dance, teaching, whatever, everybody has a true genius. Now, once, a little while ago, there was a man by the name of Stanwood Cobb that had this theory, and he wanted to put it to the test to prove scientifically that, in fact, everybody had a true genius. And he was able to start the school of the true genius. And what his idea was, is instead of teaching children to learn to read and write and do other skills by rote and pound it into them and make them perform just certain exercises, his theory was that not only did they have a true genius, but that if they discovered this true genius during their formative years, within the first 7 years of their life, that all the other things would fall immediately into place. The reading, the writing, the arithmetic, and the whole shebang. Because in order to attain their true genius as sort of a light at the end of the tunnel, everything else would find its perfections, because they would have their direction and find that certain gift that God gave them particularly. Now, there's no exception to this. Every person alive in the world today has a unique fingerprints. There's not two people alive in the world right now that has the same fingerprints. As a matter of fact, throughout the history of the whole world, all the people that were ever living on the earth and that are now dead, and all the ones that will be in the future, there still won't be two people alike that will have the same set of fingerprints. Kind of like there's no two snowflakes that are alike. Well, in the same way, every person has a true genius. And if they're able to discover this true genius in their lifetime, everything falls into place for them and they become happy and fulfilled and successful. And this is one of the things that God wants to happen for all the people here on the planet. And it doesn't matter what race they are or what religion they belong to. It goes beyond the bounds of these things. Well, Stanwood Cobb believed that they would be able to determine this with early on, that they would be able to learn quickly. And sure enough, in order for his experiment to work, it had to work 100% of the time. Well, in his school, it was working just great. All the kids had discovered their different geniuses, and they were excelling in their studies. But there was this one kid that just didn't seem to be catching on with it. And no matter what Stanwood Cobb tried to do, nothing seemed to work. And he talked to this kid, and they just couldn't get him to be interested in anything. Well, one day, Stanwood Cobb figures that his theory's not going to work, because it has to work 100% of the time, and here's this one kid it's not working with. And so he was getting ready to chuck it all. Well, he's leaving the building of the school, and he looks out, and there's this little boy playing in the mud. And he notices that he's very, very interested in what he's playing with. And so he goes over to him, and he says, "What do you got there?" And, the kid's got something in his hands, and he says, he's trying to hide it from me. He goes, no, show me. Well, what did he have in his hand? He had an earthworm in his hand, a common earthworm. He says, you like that worm? And the kid's, yes. His eyes got all big. He got all excited. And he says, well, come on in here. I want to show you something. And he took the little boy into the building, and they went into the science lab, and he pulled out a book, an encyclopedia, and he opened it up, and there's a full-color picture of the earthworm and the different hearts that it has in it and how it eats and travels and all the pictures. And the kid's he wants to read the book. Can I have that book? Can I read it? I want this, see? And Stanwood Cobb says, well, you have to learn how to read first. And this kid had never learned how to read. Well, within 1 week, he was reading at the same skill level as everybody else in his grade. And sure enough, everything else fell into place after that, and he graduated from the school, and later he went on to college, and he graduated from that, and he became the world's #1 leading authority on the earthworm. That he had discovered his true genius. It doesn't matter what other people think about this. Everybody has this. Einstein was a genius. He's heralded as one of the most brilliant scientists of the whole 20th century, of the last 100 years. He not only gives us relativity and the way we're able to make the atom bomb, but he also talks about the earth-shifting crust in Hapgood's book in the introduction to the earth-shifts crust, and many other things of this nature. He's heralded as one of the geniuses of our century, and he failed math in school, that he flunked out of algebra. Why? Because they were going to tell him how it was, and he couldn't understand it their way. And he flunked out, and he came back, and he told them how it was. And whereas they were trying to teach him, in the end, he was teaching them. Albert Einstein is one, and another one is Thomas Alva Edison. He flunked out of school. His parents couldn't get him interested in school. He was always hanging out in the garage. Thomas, get out of that garage. You got to go to school. Why can't you be like your brother? He's going to be a lawyer. And he was a lawyer. I can't even remember his name. Well, he was always tinkering in that garage, and he gives us the light bulb, the phonograph, the movie projector, electricity in our homes, and almost every modern convenience we have comes from this person that they weren't able to teach in school. He taught them. Now, Jesus wasn't allowed in the synagogue to learn about God. They wouldn't let him in. They said he didn't have a father and he was a bastard. And every time he went to speak, they told him to be shut up. Well, in the end, he came back and taught them about God. Now, one time, there was a black man in front of a Christian church crying and crying and crying that he went to one church and they wouldn't let him in because he was black. So he went to another church and they wouldn't let him in. And he went to another one. Finally, he had been to all the churches in town, and he was at the last one, and they wouldn't let him in either. And he was crying in the yard. And he looks up, and there's a man standing there. And it's Jesus. And he says, "Why are you crying?" And he says, "They won't let me in to any of the churches in town so I can be with God." He says, "Oh? They wouldn't let me in either." So the point is that everybody has a true genius, whether it's singing or teaching or whatever, or the earthworm. Everybody has this gift. Now, if they never discover this, they'll go through their whole lives being mediocre. But if they do discover this, this becomes their passion in life and the spice in their life. Now, teaching, some people might have a gift for this. Well, in the past dispensations, there was clergy that knew how to read and write, and they were the teachers, and everybody learned from them. Moses had priests, which means educators. Well, today with the printing press and the television, and people can learn to read for themselves, Baha'u'llah says there's no longer a need for a special class of teachers. He says everybody is elevated to the rank of teachers, and nobody has any right to cut out anybody away from this teaching. That everybody has a right to teach in their own way, in their own method, in their own style, in the way that they can. As soon as they hear the name Baha'u'llah, they have this franchise to teach and they can go out and teach it in their way. And nobody has a monopoly on singing either. Singing is something that everybody can do also. Also, people should be able to learn to play nice musical instruments. There's no reason to exclude one person from the band or from the teaching effort or anything of this nature. Now, there was one kid named Alexander, and he really wanted to be in the band, but he didn't know where he fit in, so he thought he'd try the trumpet. Well, he started playing the trumpet, and they says, "Well, that's just not a good noise, maybe it's not your instrument." Well, they harassed him and they made fun of him, and so he left the trumpet section. But he had guts, so he comes back and he's going to play the trombone. Well, they laughed him out of the trombone section. Now, they weren't giving him a fair shake. That anybody with practice makes perfect could be trained to learn to do these instruments. Well, finally, after being kicked out of every section in the band, he had nothing. One day, he was walking through the town, and he comes by a music store, and he sees something in the window that he'd never seen before. It was called a glockenspiel. And he says, "Well, nobody's got that." He says, "That's my instrument. I'm going to play the glockenspiel." Because the glockenspiel, they says, what's a glockenspiel? Let alone anybody can play it. What kind of music could come out of something with such a funny sound? Well, it's kind of like a xylophone with metal bars on it that you could wear around your neck like a tin drum. And he was able to march in the band and take little hammers and hit that. And when it came down to the march, he hit those things precisely when he was supposed to, and it made the whole thing beautiful. Now in Australia they have an instrument called a didgeridoo. And this sounds different than anything else anybody's ever heard, but it has its place in the world also. Prejudice needs to be eliminated, and people have a right to express their true geniuses in all the ways that God has provided for. Now the true genius, friends, is best discovered and blossoms when, under the shadow of the manifestation of God, that's when. That not only would a person have a true genius, but then to be able to recognize the manifestation, this is like taking a plant that's in the shade and putting it into transplanting it into a sunny area where it can get more sun and more nutrients, and it grows great and big and strong, and then the true genius bears its greatest fruits. A person who was once a slave or a creature to their passions is now transformed, and satanic strength can be turned into heavenly power through the appearance of the manifestation of God. That when people turn to the manifestation of God and recognize the manifestation of God, their true genius blossoms. And reading and writing and teaching and singing is just all something that goes along with the package. A person can become well-rounded and holistic. A wild flower in the desert that has only one or two petals can now become the multi-petaled flower with a beautiful fragrance which is refined and cultured. And through these manifestations of God, because of this power, all the great civilizations have blossomed and come down to us throughout the ages, through the world. And was God prejudiced and only sent one people a manifestation? No. He sent Adam to all the people of the world, and Moses to the 12 tribes of Israel, and Krishna to the Hindu people that have a great civilization. Our numbers, 1 through 9, comes from them. Later when Muhammad comes, the Arabs added the 0 and the decimal point to it. But at the time of Krishna, they reached the height of civilization. They even had flying machines and combustion engines. And these things are known and in museums in that part of the world, as well as documented in their literature and books. And then we have Zoroaster to the Persians, Buddha to the Chinese, first to India and then to China in the East. Jesus, who he says, make disciples of all nations. And today we have the Bab and Baha'u'llah. Muhammad was one of these manifestations of God also. Now, why do I bring up Muhammad? Well, here in America, people are not too familiar with the teachings of Muhammad. Well, some of these teachings of Muhammad I'm going to get into now. That one of the things was Muhammad appeared in the world where the Jews and the Christians was living in the Middle East. And where did he appear but in the Arabian Peninsula? Well, this peninsula was inhospitable, that no Christian missionary could find their way into this wasted desert to teach these people about Jesus and of the one true invisible God, to bring them the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament. Nobody could get in there. They didn't know where the oases were, and the people were barbaric and terrifying and savage-like. They sharpened their teeth sharp to points to eat raw, rotten meat that they thought was a delicacy, finding it in the desert. They perfumed their beards with camel's urine. And the men were prejudiced against their women. They treated them like chattel. Brothers would divvy up their father's wives when they died. And if they bore baby girls, they would leave them in the desert to die. And this is the people Muhammad appeared amongst. Well, who is Muhammad? I'll tell you who Muhammad is. What are the teachings of Muhammad? Here are some of the teachings of Muhammad. He taught submission to the one true God. He's the greatest protagonist of Jesus Christ and Christianity in the entire world, alone and unaided by anybody else. He single-handedly converted an entire peninsula of people, and later the entire continent of Asia, a dynasty and an empire extending from China through Persia all the way through northern Africa, across the Straits of Gibraltar into the south of Spain, north into Greece and across the Bosphorus where Turkey is, and there was even some that were living in Bosnia eventually. An empire greater than Rome under Christianity had ever attained, where schools of science and learning were established in Cordoba, Spain, that while sewage, human waste, was flowing down the streets of Paris, and there was muggings and robbery and the plague and the dark ages of Europe, just several hundred miles away in Spain were paved streets, lighted walkways, university systems, and you could leave your backpack on the street corner and come back in a week and it would still be there unmolested and untouched and unharmed. Muhammad civilized these people and united them under the one banner of God, accepting Moses and Jesus within his lifetime. Within his lifetime. And his victory was in 628 AD. Well, these prophetic words appear in the last verse of the book of Daniel. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1335 days. And Abdul-Baha, in the book Baha'u'llah the New Era, in the chapter Prophecies of Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha, in the subsection on the coming of the kingdom of God, reckons the fulfillment of these 1335 days, which is solar years, from the victory of Muhammad in 628 AD to added makes 1963 AD, when the establisher of the Baha'i faith, Dr. Leland Jensen, was opposed by Satan, that the guardian designated Rex King as Satan, and he begins his ministry. Within his lifetime, the whole world will come into this kingdom. Well, Muhammad was the greatest protagonist of Christianity, but the Christians don't give him a hoot of respect or anything, any more than the Jews are able to recognize Jesus, the greatest protagonist of the Judaism in the Old Testament. The New Testament is a small book sewn onto the Old Testament, which is a large book. But through Jesus, the whole world has the Bible now. And the same way Jesus was the greatest protagonist of Judaism and the one true God, Muhammad is the greatest protagonist of Christianity. Well, what did he teach the Muslims? How does this relate to today? One of the things he taught them is he forbid them to make offensive war. He says, not unless you are attacked and your women are threatened to be raped and your children killed, should you take up arms. And in that case, you can take up arms to defend yourself. And he says, well, what about the Jews and the Christians which don't accept you, Muhammad? He says, you're not to harm them. They're the people of the book. And this is in the Quran that Muhammad wrote. Well, what was the Christian response to this? The Crusades, in which the French and the Europeans ate the Muslims through cannibalism. Now, this is a book on the Crusades through Arab eyes. And these Europeans arrived during the Crusades. They figured they'd convert the Muslims to accepting Jesus. Well, the Muslims already believed in Jesus. They failed. But what they did do is they brought civilization back from Islam to Europe, which brought us out of the Dark Ages. And today we have the Arabic numerals, alcohol, algebra, all the words that begin with AL in our language comes from Islam. The dome on the Capitol building on our government comes from Islam. The sheriff here in town is from the Sharif. The mayor is from the Emir. We have the legal system and the government of the civilization of Islam. Well, for 3 days, the Crusaders of Europe put people to the sword. They were not only killing the Muslims, but Arabic Christians. Killing, because they weren't white, killing more than 100,000 people and taking many prisoners. In Marar, which is one village, these troops boiled pagan adults in cooking pots, that is the Muslim adults. They impaled their children on spits and devoured them, grilled. The inhabitants of the towns of the villages of near Marar would never read this confession, which was made by Rudolph of Cayenne. He confesses that they were eating these people alive. And throughout their epic literature, the Crusaders are invariably described as anthropophagi, or flesh chewers, human flesh chewers. And what did they do? They stormed the villages of the Muslims. They sieged them and ran around them, screaming at the top of their lungs, that they saw, for example, they would roam through the country openly proclaiming that they would chew the flesh of these Muslims and gather around their nocturnal campfires to devour their prey, that they would eat their children. Muhammad forbid the Muslims to harm the Christians and the Jews in the book, but the Christians were eating the Muslims. Now today we have something just as atrocious still going on. 2 years ago, there was so much starvation in Bosnia that they were eating the dead there. Why isn't that a front page headline? Well, Clinton says on February 20th, if the Serbs are not out of Muslim-occupied Sarajevo, then we're going to bomb them. He warned them. Well, what happened? Well, they didn't all get out on time. Only 60% of their things were still left there. Did we bomb them? No. Well, now he set another deadline. Well, he's going to warn them again. It's just like little kids in the playground. Well, I'm going to warn you. You better not do that. Well, I'm going to warn you again. Okay, no more warning. Now I'm going to threaten you. You better stop or we'll really take some action now. Well, we're going to double dog dare you to threaten you. Okay, no more threats. We're giving you an ultimatum. See? No more threats. And this ultimatum is, if you don't leave, we'll warn you. See? That this is just junk that's been taking place for all this time. 50,000 women were raped, over 150,000 killed, and this just goes on and on and on. Now, I'm going to show you some headlines you've probably already seen in this week's paper. The Serbs then shot down a NATO jet. See? Then it says the UN is helpless and concedes Serbs can't be stopped. Now, what did the Serbs do the next day? Renegade Serbs seized UN arms that was confiscated from Sarajevo, and they're planning to rebomb it. And now what did they do? Defiant Serbs blasted a hospital where the sick and dying were, not to mention the rape camps they have. Well, is this supposed to make Americans mad? Are we supposed to say, God damn it, let's go kill those dirty Serbs? No, that's not the right answer either. This whole scenario is a farce. It is a farce of the worst proportions that the Christian cannibals that ate the Muslims during the Crusades still have a double standard against the Muslims. Muhammad is a dirty false prophet in their eyes. Clinton meets with the author of the book, The Satanic Verses, Solomon Rushdie. He slaps a fourth of the world across the face when he did this. And Islam is not a viable religion, they say. Well, what is going on in the UN? When Czechoslovakia was one country, the Czechs and the Slovaks united together because they didn't want to get swallowed up into the communism of Stalin. Well, they got swallowed up anyway. Well, the Serbs and the Bosnians and the Croatians didn't want to get swallowed up into communism either. So they made a covenant between each other. Let's us three unite together into united Slavic countries, or Yugoslavia, and then we won't get swallowed up. And they did this under Tito. And it was fine. They didn't get swallowed up by the communist bloc. Well, when Tito died, the government still kind of went on. Well, it had always sort of been in Serb control throughout all three countries because Tito was a Serb. But then when the Berlin Wall fell, they says the reason for our alliance has ended. There's no more threat. Let's go back to being three separate countries. And the Czechs and the Slovaks says, yes, our threat is gone. Let us go back to being two separate countries. So the Czechs is one country, and the Slav is another country. Well, there's no war going on between the Czechs and the Slavs. They disbanded peacefully. Well, when it came time for Yugoslavia to disband, there was something a little bit different. Two of the countries were upstanding, righteous, and acceptable. They were white and Christian, the Orthodox Serbs and those Catholic Croatians. See? Oh, but those Bosnians will set up a Muslim government in the heart of Christian Europe. And the Romanian ambassador says, we will never tolerate the establishment of a fundamentalist Islamic state in the heart of Christian Europe. What's he talking about? Our Christian governments are Islamic. We've got the Sharif of Missoula and the Emir of Missoula and the dome on top of the building here. Our legal system comes from Islam. They're prejudiced. This whole thing could have been avoided if they made a deal. They told the Bosnians they would only recognize them as a separate country if they disarmed, and then we'd protect them. So they disarmed, and we didn't protect them. That says we're helpless and they can't be stopped, and all of these atrocities have taken place. We have warplanes flying over that country, and now they're thinking of further threats and violence. You know what the solution to this problem is? Let these people have their country. And the Muslims have been saying in the UN, just let the Bosnians have enough arms to defend peace within their own borders. If the Bosnian government was accepted by the UN just to have peace within its own borders, enough weapons, well, Radovic and the other ones would have stood up. It would have been like the North and the South, a civil war. And if the government of the North didn't have, which was in support of the Constitution, they needed an army to keep the peace. Something similar was going on in South Africa. They want to have a black government now. Well, they'll go for Nelson Mandela, and then the whites have de Klerk, which is a minority, and they want to have elections. But the Zulus and KwaZulu, they want to secede. Well, that's a big mistake, because if they succeed from the Union, united we stand, divided we fall. They weaken the whole structure of South Africa. So this was a mistake from the beginning. Well, the Zulu king and the Zulu head of their party says he'll join with the election now because he sees that they're more powerfully united. And all they did is they want their traditional monarchy to stay intact. And now they're going to participate. Well, if there's a revolution in Bosnia, the Bosnian government should have been allowed to put it down. They could have arrested this Radovic guy that organized death camps. They could have put sanctions on Serbia to stop them funneling weapons to the Bosnian Serbs. And they could have backed up a recognized government, but they didn't do it for the simple reason that they were Muslim and Islamic, and the UN being run by 4 Christian nuclear superpowers, England the lion's mouth, Russia the bear's feet, France the leopard's body, and the eagle's wings, which is the United States. The beast in Revelation has this double standard against the Muslims. They have it against the Muslims in Iraq with Saddam Hussein. The peace process is falling all to hell with the PLO in Israel. They got a double standard against the Muslims there, the ones in Somalia, and because of this, friends, we have only less than 2 weeks till on May 2nd of this year, the UN building and all New York City is to be destroyed along with it. Why? Because of its sins against the people of the world, its crimes against humanity, and this double standard it's imposed. And it's like a big cancerous tumor, this UN and this military machine, the United States, sucking the taxes out of the people that should go for education and medicine to help develop the people's true geniuses. And until this blight, which is living off of the souls of this country, which it has enslaved in its pagan Trinitarian form of Christianity, is eradicated, no person is going to be free of this beast, which is the United Nations. And in the book of Revelations it says, look at this beast. Who can fight against this beast? Who? God. God can fight against this beast. That's who. And in Revelation 16:16 it says the seat of this beast is to be destroyed. And Ezekiel gives 430 days of siege of the city of New York, starting from the Trade Tower bombing of February 26, 1992, which we, the Baha'is, under the provisions of the covenant, accurately predicted over 3 months before it happened. We add those 430 days to that, we get May 2nd, 1994, when this is going to take place. And the people will get a bonk on the head, and they will all wake up to what we're saying. Some to everlasting life, and some to everlasting shame and contempt. Because some of them are just going to go straight to hell in a handbasket. They're going to march onward into World War III, saying, these Muslims destroyed our beloved city, like those Japs that destroyed Pearl Harbor that we put into concentration camps here in America during the World War II. Let's go, the bigots will say, kill those diaper heads. But we will get 144,000 people under the provisions of the covenant, and many more to boot. And while Christians that have been lied to are looking in the sky for Jesus to return. Those people that truly believe in Jesus, as he has spoken in Matthew 24, he says, go to the mountains. They will flee to the mountains in this area. And guess what? Montana is due for a major population growth. These things, friends, is happening. And these prophecies, friends, is being fulfilled before your very eyes. Now it's my great pleasure to welcome back to our show a brilliant writer, a dedicated educator, a member of the local Baha'i Council of the city of Missoula, and a true genius in her own right. Her name is Kay Woods, and her talk for tonight is The Sign of an Ancient Plan. Kay?
Thank you, Neil. You know, we take our time and we come on the show every Friday, and it takes a great deal of preparation, and we go to a lot of work, you know, to gather all the information and the proofs and the evidences. And we come on here and we lay them all out before you like a meal fit for a king. It's amazing, the proofs and the evidences. What we have to say is amazing. And you know, and when we come on and we tell you about all this conflict in the world going on in the Middle East, you know, this is not to upset anyone, and this is not to make it seem like things in the world are pretty grim and like, you know, is there any hope at all? Where is the solution to this problem? Well, the purpose of our coming on the show is to tell you there is a solution, and that you should be happy. You should be glad in your heart because the Prince of Peace has returned. He has returned and he is Baha'u'llah. And not only that, but you're lucky enough to be not only in the right time frame, but you're also in the right place because the establisher of the Prince of Peace is alive and in the world today. And he has a message that is the hope and the salvation for all of humanity, if we can but accept this. Well, you might be saying, well, you know, maybe you're a regular viewer, maybe this is the first time you've ever tuned into the show, maybe you kind of tune in once in a while and take what you like and leave the rest or whatever. And maybe you've seen a lot of stuff that really makes a lot of sense, but you're thinking to yourself, you know, it's pretty neat, but I don't know if I'm convinced. Maybe I'm just not totally convinced. Well, I don't know if maybe you're like me, but sometimes I kind of look at signs. You know, I kind of look at the road signs along the way, and I think, well, I'm going to put it in God's hands, okay? Because sometimes when we put things in God's hands and we look at signs, those signs can become pretty clear. Well, if you're looking for a sign that what we have to tell you on this show is real, is the truth, I'm here to tell you that there's an actual sign revealing the ancient plan of God. And it could be staring you in the face every day. In fact, each time you head downtown on Orange Street, you cannot help but catch a glance of this modern-day sign of an ancient plan of peace brought by the Prince of Peace, a sign waiting to reveal a message that is the hope and the salvation of the world. Well, since the early 60s, this sign is hung around our necks, plastered our car bumpers, and adorned our clothing. Well, for those of us growing up in the 60s, maybe the sign makes you think of John Lennon or anti-nuclear war rebels or flower children and things like this from the Woodstock generation. But unlike the smiley face and the psychedelic posy, this sign is special because this sign still lives on today, and it lingers on in its persistent reminder that peace is the only hope for the fate of humanity. Well, you may have guessed it by now, but this sign that I am talking about is the peace sign. And as I'll be showing you, the peace sign is more than just a remnant of a beatnik generation, culminating in the early 60s over its despair over political, social, and spiritual injustice, which lent itself to a decade, one of the decades of the greatest conflict in the history of America. The early 60s was an explosion and a revolution and of a new insight into the need for justice in this land. Young rebels around the world began an open and raging and sometimes fatal appeal that there must be an end and an alternative to this kind of action, to war, to nuclear war, and that the nations must lay down their weapons, their nuclear arms, if we're ever to even consider the possibility of there being peace. And sometimes we were forced to keep our mouths shut. And luckily, the peace sign, all we had to do was slap it on our bumper or something, and it said it for us. Well, the 60s truly prepared us for the dawn of a so-called Age of Aquarius, when peace and love was to steer the stars and guide this planet. Well, we thought the peace sign was going to change the world. Now, here we are, still today, in a world filled, literally filled with darkness and with chaos, as Neil has shown you, and with conflict and war and prejudice that is escalating daily. What is the true source of peace? And how are we going to achieve peace? The purpose of this talk tonight is to give you the correct answer to this question. One thing that we do know, and this is why we come on this show, is that peace is promised. Today, the kingdom of God on earth is being established, and the message of the Prince of Peace is here in Missoula, Montana, for all those who seek it. Tonight I will talk about the origin of the peace sign and its prophetic symbolism, how the symbols reveal a common foundation of all peoples for the brotherhood of humanity, and how it symbolizes an ancient plan for world peace brought by Baha'u'llah, the Prince of Peace. The peace sign is an anti-nuclear war emblem. It was designed in Europe in the late 1950s as a symbol of protest against nuclear war. It was first revealed by the philosopher Lord Bertrand Russell of England during Easter of 1958, and he used it at the first anti-nuclear war demonstration in Aldermaston in England, which was a research center for the development of nuclear arms. The peace sign then stands for nuclear disarmament. The three branches that you see here were formed out of the letters N for nuclear and D for disarmament. You might wonder, well, where do you get the letters N and D out of here? Well, the letters were taken from the semaphore code and superimposed together. The semaphore code is an international marine flag signaling system. So the N would be a person standing with their arms out at a 35-degree angle, and then the D would be the arms shaped, positioned in a vertical way. So this is nuclear, and this is D, and this is disarmament. And here we have the three branches right here. Others say that the branches represents a dove. Well, during the Vietnam War, there was a group of people who thought that, we could avoid war and this kind of stuff if only the people would get together and talk it out, if only they would enter into consultation with one another. Well, perhaps there are deeper meanings contained in the peace sign. For instance, some meanings that really haven't been explained before. For instance, let's take the circle. The circle surrounding the three branches indicates total or worldwide nuclear disarmament. It could also signify world unity because to the Native Americans, the circle stands for the brotherhood of all peoples. And ironically, the first of Baha'u'llah's 12 basic principles is the oneness of humanity. But there's more. The numbering system uses a circle for a zero, and a zero represents a seed. In ancient Chaldea, the seed was signified by a circle, or a zero. Hislop writes, a circle in Chaldea was zero, and zero also signified the seed. Therefore, according to the genius of the mystic system of Chaldea, circle was understood to signify zero, or the seed. Well, notice that contained in the circle are three branches. Could this circle represent the seed of a tree? If so, what kind of tree? The book of Genesis describes an ancient family tree branching off in three parts. This tree is the genealogy of Abraham and his three wives, Sarah, Keturah, and Hagar. In other words, this is a family tree. It is the tree of life spoken of in the book of Genesis. The tree of life is God's covenant that as long as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west and the stars are up in the sky and the sun revolves around the moon and it gets dark every 24 hours, that God will always send a manifestation or a promised one or a divine educator to reveal the thought of God to us in a revelation so that we can be made in God's image. In Genesis, there's this covenant, and it's the greatest covenant. It says, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. That's kind of clever. When somebody pointed that out to me, I had never seen that before. I knew that we were supposed to be made in God's image. But why does it say us and our? Adam didn't bring pantheism. We know that there's only one true invisible God. So the us and the our are these divine educators, or these manifestations that God sends from time to time that are pure and polished mirrors, and they reflect the image of God to us. The tree of life is God's covenant. Okay, well, another of Baha'u'llah's 12 basic principles is that religion is progressive, with all having a common foundation. Over the last 6,000 years, God has sent 9 divine educators, or manifestations of God, each revealing a revelation from God, like teachers in the grades of school. So there have been 9 manifestations over the last 6,000 years. They are Adam, and Adam came in 4122 BC, Moses in 1456 BC, who brought Judaism, Krishna in 1246 BC, Hinduism, Zoroaster in 1000 BC, Zoroastrianism, Buddha in 755 BC brought Buddhism, Jesus, of course, brought Christianity in 30 AD, Muhammad in 622 AD revealed Islam, the Bab in 1844 AD, who was the forerunner or the John the Baptist, and his name means the gate or the door, to the one whom God shall make manifest. And the one whom God shall make manifest, the one whom the Bab was preparing for, is Baha'u'llah, and Baha'u'llah's name means the glory of the Father, or the glory of God. He came in 1863. Now it's interesting because each of these manifestations in the Bible, it talks about the flaming sword which guards the tree of life. And what this is this is the ancient Kabbalah tree. And this is the flaming sword protecting the tree of life. And on this tree of life are 9 points. And these 9 points are the 9 manifestations that I just listed for you. Whoops, we're upside down. Let's fix this here. Okay. Okay, the one up here is Adam, Moses, Krishna, Zoroaster, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, the Bab, and at the very base of this tree, at the root of this tree, is Baha'u'llah. And in the sacred writings of Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah is actually called the ancient root. That is his title. And now it's interesting because there's another one. There's a 10th one. And in the Hindu prophecies, it talks about the coming of a 10th avatar. Well, this one here is actually called the Haaretz. The root of the tree is planted in the Haaretz, and Haaretz is Hebrew for the land. And the land is Leland, who is the establisher of Baha'u'llah. And he is the one that the Baha'i revelation depends upon, because he explains and reveals the teachings of Baha'u'llah's revelation in his sacred covenant to us. And the path of the flaming sword are the 3 universal manifestations of Adam, Jesus, and Baha'u'llah. And the reason it goes through Jesus and Baha'u'llah is because among the 9 manifestations, Jesus and Baha'u'llah were special. And the reason that they were special is because they were two Christs. And I'll explain more about that, and there's actually Bible prophecies of there being 2 Christs. So from the seed of Abraham, each of these 9 manifestations are descended. From Sarah we have Moses and the Jewish manifestations of Jesus and Baha'u'llah. From Keturah we have Zoroaster, the Eastern manifestations, also the Aryan manifestations of Zoroaster, Krishna, and Buddha. And from Hagar, we have Muhammad, who came in Arabia, and the Bab, who came in Persia. So as we can see, all the religions of the world are of one common foundation. They're all united. There's no reason why the different peoples and different religions should be fighting over, should be at war with each other, because they all come from the same common foundation. Now from the seed of Abraham and his 3 wives, all the nations on earth are to be blessed and one day be united. In Genesis, it's written, "The Lord said to Abram, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward, for all the land which you see I will give to you and to your descendants forever." Well, who is Abraham? Why did God choose Abraham? What was special about him? Abraham was a very highly spiritual person who found idols and statues completely abhorrent, completely detestable. He hated them. And he hated them with a passion. He accepted the one true invisible God. And then later he was educated by a highly spiritual person named Shem or Melchizedek because he wanted to know more about the one true invisible God. To give you an example of Abraham's devotion to the one true God, I'm going to tell you a story about Abraham. Abraham lived in a place called Ur, which was in Babylon. And of course, Babylon at that time was very, very pagan. It was an extremely pagan empire. It was created by Nimrod and Semiramis. Abraham's father, of course, was an idol maker. In the evening, Abraham used to help his father make idols. And in the morning, they would be placed in the temple and worshipped as gods in place of the one true invisible God. Abraham couldn't figure out, he just couldn't understand how in the evening he could be helping his father make these statues out of stone and out of wood with his own 2 hands, and then the next morning they would be placed in the temple and worshipped as gods in the place of the one true invisible God. Well, one day he thought to himself, crying out loud, these are not God. God is invisible. This is ridiculous. Here I've been slaving over making these gods with my own 2 hands, and they're worshipped as God? This is crazy. God is invisible. Well, the more he thought about this, the more pissed off Abraham got. And one day after everyone left the temple and went home, Abraham entered the temple, and with an axe he went around and he smashed all of the idols to pieces. Left a big mess all over the floor. Then he placed the axe in the hand of the largest idol up on the mantle, and he left the temple. Well, the next morning when the priest went into the temple and he saw this big mess, he was outraged. He said, oh my gosh, who could do this to our idols? This is horrible. Who has done this? Well, one of the guards spotted Abraham leaving the temple, and he said, I think I know who did it. And the priest said, bring that man to me right now. Well, the guard brought Abraham to the priest. And the priest said, he called on Abraham. He said, Abraham, was that you who destroyed these idols? I heard that, you had been in this temple and one of the guards saw you leave the temple. Was that you who did this? And Abraham, of course, he said, oh, no, I had nothing to do with it. No, it wasn't me. And the priest said, Abraham, you were the last one to leave the temple, and the guard locked the door after that. Well, Abraham replied, yeah, I guess I was in there all right. But you see, when I was in there, all the gods got into this big, huge fight over who was the most powerful of the gods. They got into a huge fight, and they were all trying to kill each other. And that god over there, he got down off of his perch and started chopping them all up. See him over there? He's still got the axe in his hand to prove it. See? And the high priest exclaimed, you liar! Abraham asked, well, why do you say that? The high priest said, that's ridiculous. That god couldn't get down off of his perch, much less swing an axe at the rest of the gods. That's ridiculous, Abraham asked. Well, how come? The priest replied, because he's made of wood. and of stone. How could he move or budge if he's made of wood or stone? And Abraham said, oh, so you mean is that what God is like? He can't move, he can't budge. In other words, he's powerless. Well, with that, the high priest, of course, got even more angry than ever. He said, burn him! Well, Abraham, of course, he took off running. And he had had enough of Ur at that point. He was completely fed up with all these idolaters and all this paganism. So he snuck out of the gathering, and he went home to get Sarah. And then he went to his cousin Lot's house. They left Ur in the middle of the night, and then they went north to Haran to gather some of Abraham's relatives. From there they headed for Palestine because Abraham knew that Melchizedek had gone down there, and Abraham wanted to become more knowledgeable in the one true invisible God. And in the teachings of Adam. Well, after all, there was really no place in Babylonia where a person could learn about the one true invisible God with all the paganism. Well, in order to get into Palestine, Abraham and his company of followers had to cross the Jordan River. And he who crosses over is Hebrew. The word Hebrew means he who crosses over. So Abraham and his company of followers and his family were the first Hebrews. While Abraham was in Palestine, he came across some Babylonian pagans. Each of the villages in Palestine were corrupted with paganism, and each of the villages had a separate kingship. Abraham got into a battle with each of the kings in each of these villages, and he slaughtered each of these kings, and this was known as the Battle of the Kings. Then Abraham and his family went on to Jerusalem to meet Melchizedek. Well, who is Melchizedek? Melchizedek was the high priest, Shem. Melchizedek was a title given to Shem, the beloved son of Noah. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, the beloved son, Ham was the cursed son, and then there was Japheth. Well, Shem was the only survivor of the flood who remained true to the teachings of Adam, true to the teachings of the one true invisible God. Melchizedek means defender of Zadok, or Adam, because he defended the teachings of the one invisible God. Without Shem, all the world would have been overcome by paganism. And Shem conquered paganism. After the flood of Noah, the Trinitarian paganism of Nimrod and Semiramis had spread all the way from the Middle East to the Straits of Gibraltar. Shem exposed Nimrod's apostasy before a court of 72 judges in Egypt, which ruled to have Nimrod put to death. In order to protect the pure teachings of Adam, along with himself and his family, he built a wall 20 feet thick by 30 feet high all around Jerusalem, which was indestructible. And this is because the Babylonian priest king, of course, was, and his army wanted to come after Shem because they were so mad that he had Nimrod exposed. So he needed to protect his family and the teachings of the one true invisible God. And within these walls, he was able to do that because the walls were indestructible. Well, seeing how loyal to the one true invisible God Abraham was, Melchizedek, or Shem, blessed Abraham and made a promise that he was to become the father of a multitude of nations. Then Abraham enrolled in the Bet Midrash, and Bet Midrash means house of study, headed by Melchizedek, and became very knowledgeable about the 6,000-year Adamic cycle and about the revelation and the laws of Adam and about the tree of life. Now, as I've said, Abraham had 3 wives, Sarah, Keturah, and Hagar. From these 3 wives, the pure religion of the one true invisible God went out from Palestine and spread out in all 4 directions of north, south, east, and west. The Lord said to Abram, "Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are." And of course, they were in Palestine at that time. "Northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see I will give to you and to your descendants forever." So Abraham and Sarah settled in Palestine, and when they were in Palestine, they had a son, Isaac. Isaac had a son, Jacob, and Jacob and his 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. From the tribe of Levi came the manifestation Moses, and he brought a religion, Judaism, which was for the nation of Israel. Later came Jesus from the tribe of Judah, whose religion was to spread out from Palestine among the Gentiles, and then later Baha'u'llah would be descended from the tribe of Judah, and his revelation is for the whole world. From Hagar and her son Ishmael is descended Muhammad in Arabia and the Bab in Persia. Ishmael's descendants, called Ishmaelites, went out from Palestine, and they went to the south country and settled in the area of Paran, and this is modern-day Arabia, and this is where Muhammad came from. Well, in the Bible, it says that Ishmael and his descendants settled in the wilderness of Arabia, as if his descendants were savages or beasts or something. Well, in the Quran, it says that Abraham and Ishmael actually went down into the city of Mecca and built the Kaaba that the Muslims still worship in today. Muhammad came and he revealed the teaching of Allah, of the one true invisible God, and Islam then, from Arabia, Islam spread all throughout Egypt, North Africa, went up into Spain, and halfway into France. With the coming of Muhammad, Hagar's descendants spread the religion of the one true invisible Allah, or God, south and then west, up into Europe. From Keturah are descended the eastern manifestations of Krishna, Zoroaster, and Buddha. After Sarah died and Hagar was out in the desert, Abraham was all alone. So he took a third wife, and this third wife was Keturah. And Abraham had 6 sons with Keturah. It says, Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, and it goes on to list the 6 sons. All these were the children of Keturah. And while he was still living, he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the east country. Well, Abraham took Keturah and their 6 sons out from Palestine, across the Jordan River, and into Azerbaijan, which is in northern Iran, and this is where Zoroaster is descended. Now it says that Keturah's descendants were sent to the east country, meaning that from northern Iran they went east and they settled in India. And they brought with them the teaching of the one true invisible God. And it is from these people that Krishna and Buddha are descended. From India they went up into Asia and migrated westward into Europe, and they began the Germanic tribes. Well, believe it or not, the Europeans obtained their qualities of having blonde hair and blue eyes from Keturah's descendants, because Keturah actually had blonde hair and blue eyes herself. She was an Aryan. And Buddha said that he was descended from Krishna and that Krishna was an Aryan. He says, make no mistake, I am an Aryan, and the religion I bring is an Aryan religion. Thus the teachings of the one true invisible God, revealed by the manifestations, went out from Palestine northward, southward, down into Arabia, eastward into India and China, where the eastern religions settled, and westward. And Baha'u'llah brings a universal revelation to be established among all the nations, and all the peoples eventually will be united in the same foundation. This means that everyone, whether they are Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, or Baha'i, or whatever, they're all of one family and one common foundation. God left a practical plan, a practical peace plan to unite the world in a spirit of justice. The story began with Abraham. As I've explained, Abraham was loyal to the one true invisible God. So Abraham was blessed, and he was to become the father of the multitude of nations by his 3 wives, Sarah, Keturah, and Hagar. In Genesis, it says, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless, and I will make my covenant between me and you, and will multiply you exceedingly. Behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations, and kings shall come forth from you. Abraham's first wife, Sarah, was not able to conceive and bear children. So Hagar was given to Sarah as her handmaiden to serve and to assist her. And this is a really important point that I'm going to come back to a lot in the course of this talk, is that the purpose of Sarah, or the purpose of Hagar, was to protect and assist Sarah. And what this means is that the nation that came from Hagar and the nation that came from Sarah were supposed to work together. The nation of Islam, the purpose of it is supposed to be to protect and to assist the house of David, or Israel. So Hagar conceived, but then Sarah became jealous and dealt harshly with her. Hagar then fled into the wilderness, but Hagar was told to return and to submit to Sarah. And this is why Islam means to submit. Hagar was then promised that her descendants would multiply greatly, and she bore a son who is Ishmael. Later Sarah was given a blessing that she was to become a mother of nations, and that kings of people should come forth from her. Sarah was to bear a son, and he would be called Isaac. So both wives were given two separate promises for the coming of two separate nations of Islam and Israel, with Islam's job to protect and assist Israel. In Genesis, it says, I will establish my covenant with him, Isaac, as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I will bless him and make him fruitful and multiply him exceedingly. He shall be the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. Now, as the promise has foretold, God's covenant was established with Isaac. Isaac bore a son, Jacob, who was renamed Jacob Israel, and then Jacob had 12 biological sons who became the 12 tribes of Israel. And one of these tribes was the tribe of Judah. Now from the tribe of Judah, a special promise for an everlasting, physical, male line, genealogical throne of David, everlasting throne of David, was given. And this is in the book of Psalms in chapter 89. Thou hast said, I have made a covenant with my chosen one. I have sworn to David my servant, I will establish your descendants forever, and build your throne for all generations. Verses 3 through 4. On the other hand, Hagar's son Ishmael was given the promise of the great nation of Islam, and the father of 12 princes, or 12 spiritual successors to Muhammad. So the nation of Islam, as we can see, and the nation of Islam was actually to become a spiritual successorship. Muhammad was to have 12 imams, or 12 princes, who were his spiritual successors. They weren't biological male-line sons. They were spiritual successors. On the other hand, on the side of Sarah and her descendants was to be a male-line physical, genealogical, actually physical throne of King David. And this is a really important point which I'm going to come back to later on in the course of this talk. Okay, so the promise of the two separate nations of Israel and of Islam was fulfilled when Sarah cast Hagar, the slave woman, out, saying that Ishmael was not to be heir with her son Isaac. Isaac's descendants then remained in Palestine, and Ishmael and his descendants, known as Ishmaelites, departed from Isaac's descendants and settled in the area of Paran, which is modern-day Arabia. So from Sarah came the great nation of Israel, and from Hagar, the great nation of Islam. Now, according to God's covenant with David, David's physical genealogy, or his physical male line, father to son, Davidic throne, is to last forever. David had a son, Solomon, who sat on the throne, and all the male line descendants of Solomon sat on the throne of David. And it's going to continue in an unbroken chain like this forever. Now from the tribe of Judah came Jesus Christ, who was made of the seed of David. In Romans, in the book of Romans, it says that he was made of the seed of David. Concerning his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, which was made of the seed of David according to the flesh. Well, that's pretty neat, because if you look up the word seed in Greek, you'll find that the word seed actually means sperm. So that kind of blows the theory that Jesus was a physical descendant from God, because God didn't have a sperm. So Joseph had to have had a part in this. And Mary doesn't have a sperm either. Okay, so Jesus was a Christ. Well, now what does Christ mean? Christ is a title denoting Jesus' genealogy. Christ means anointed male line, descendant of King David. Christ comes from the Hebrew word Messiah, which means anointed. And interestingly enough, only the male line descendants from King David were anointed. And that the way that the kings of David were anointed was upon the forehead with olive oil, as a symbol of enlightenment, because it's olive oil that they used to light their lamps in those days. Well, now Jesus, being a manifestation of God, was anointed not with olive oil upon the forehead, but with the Holy Spirit, direct from God. Jesus' full title was Messiah ben David. Although Jesus' title means that he was the Christ, what's significant here is that he was not of the royal line of King David. He was a descendant not of the royal line from Solomon, but Solomon's brother Nathan. And Nathan didn't sit on the throne. And you can look up that genealogy for yourself in the book of Luke. So Nathan was not a Davidic king, so therefore Jesus did not sit on the throne of David. Now because Jesus did not sit upon the throne of David, he did not have any sons to pass on this everlasting throne. So therefore Jesus did not set up a kingship, and he does not fulfill the promise that God made with King David. For this reason Jesus said, "My kingship is not of this world." Well, a lot of the Christians of today are expecting Jesus to return in the flesh, as the same exact person. Well, even Jesus is not going to return in the flesh. He's not going to return in the clouds. He returned in the flesh, but not as the same exact person, but as a different person who actually sits on the throne of David. And even if Jesus did return in the same exact person, in the same exact flesh, he didn't sit on the throne of David 2,000 years ago. So how is he going to sit on the throne of David today and have sons who sit on this throne? So Jesus was crucified. He wasn't the redeeming Messiah who was to bring a kingship and all that kind of stuff and a government. He was the suffering Messiah. He was crucified, and he told us to pray for the coming of the kingdom of God on earth. And kingdom actually means, it's so simple, everybody has their own idea of what the kingdom is, but the kingdom is simply king with a domain. It's a government with a king with subjects and laws. Now, if Jesus did not sit on the throne of David or set up a kingship, then where does this kingship or this kingdom come about? How is the kingdom of God going to come about? Two distinct and separate Christs, as I mentioned earlier when I showed you the Kabbalah tree, are prophesied in the Old Testament, a suffering and a redeeming Christ. And the popular author of a very, very popular book called The Late Great Planet Earth, it sold about 30 million copies. It was written by Hal Lindsey. He actually writes about there being two portraits of a coming Messiah. He says, two completely different portraits of a coming Messiah were described by the Old Testament prophets. One portrait of the Messiah depicts him as a humble servant who would suffer for others and be rejected by his own countrymen. This portrait we may call the suffering Messiah, and you can look this up in Isaiah 53. The other portrait shows the Messiah as a conquering king with unlimited power who comes suddenly to earth at the height of a global war and saves man from self-destruction. Isn't that kind of what we're talking about today? Well, this is Baha'u'llah. He places the Israelites who believe in him as the spiritual and secular leaders of the world and brings in an age free of prejudice and injustice. And Baha'u'llah brought the principle, the elimination of prejudices of every kind, and his government is for justice. So it's easy to see why this would be the most popular portrait. We may call the second picture the reigning Messiah. Of course, this is in Isaiah 9. Now in Zechariah 4, Zechariah actually has a vision where he sees these two Christs. I don't know if you ever knew that before. I know I didn't. It says, okay, so Zechariah is having a vision, and he says, I see, and behold, a lampstand, all of gold, with a bowl on the top of it, and 7 lamps on it, with 7 lips on each of the lamps which are on the top of it. Now it's interesting because before I listed these manifestations, and there were 9 of them. Now he can't be talking about a physical lamp because lamps don't have lips. Well, what has lips so that they can speak? Manifestations have lips so that they can speak. 7 lips on each of the lamps which are on the top of it. And there are 2 olive trees by it. Well, that's interesting because, as I explained earlier, Messiah actually means anointed, or Christ means anointed. One on the right of the bowl and the other on its left. And I said to the angel who talked with me, what are these, my Lord? Then the angel who talked with me answered, do you not know what these are? No, my Lord. Then he said to me, these 7 are the eyes of the Lord, which range through the whole earth. And as I was explaining earlier, there have been 9 manifestations, each with a revelation direct from God, so that we can know the thought of God and be made in his image. Then I said to him, what are these 2 olive trees on the right and on the left of the lampstand? Do you not know what these are? I said, no, my Lord. Then he said, these are the 2 anointed who stand by the Lord of the whole earth. And what we have is we have the state seal of Israel. We have a menorah, a Jewish menorah. It's a lampstand with 9 figures on it. In all, there's 7 lamps, 2 olive branches, 9. And among those 9, 2 anointed, 2 Christs. Okay, so who is the second Christ? By no less than Jesus himself, a prophecy is given that Jesus is supposed to return as Baha'u'llah. For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in Baha'u'llah. Now, Jesus didn't speak English. He spoke a Galilean dialect of Aramaic. And what he actually said was Baha'u'llah. And then later on, this passage was translated into English to read, when he comes in the glory of the Father. But Baha'u'llah means the glory of the Father. So what he said was that he would come in Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah is the return of Christ seated on the throne of David. And unlike Jesus, he was descended from the royal line of Solomon, who was seated upon the throne of David. Baha'u'llah was born and raised in Persia. Now, if the throne of David was in Israel, how did Baha'u'llah sit on the throne of David? Well, before Jesus came around, the throne of David was taken out of Jerusalem and was moved to Babylon, and then later to Nur in Persia, where Baha'u'llah was born, which is why Jesus never sat on the throne. Because when Jesus was around, there was already a king seated on the throne of David over in Babylon. In 721 BC, King Shalmaneser V from Assyria came down and he conquered the 10 northern tribes of Israel, and he brought them back into Assyria and Media, which is in modern-day Iran. In 606 BC, Nebuchadnezzar came in and he destroyed Jerusalem, and in 597 BC, the 2 southern tribes of Benjamin and Judah were taken into Babylon, or modern-day Iraq, including the Exarch, and Exarch means exiled Davidic monarch, Jehoiachin, seated on the throne of David. In 561 BC, Jehoiachin was freed from prison by Nebuchadnezzar's son, Evil-Merodach, who then set the throne of David up over all the other thrones in Babylon. Then Jehoiachin moved to a place along the Euphrates River in Iraq, known as Nahardia, where he built a temple called Shafviativ, which means the divine presence has moved from the temple in Jerusalem and settled in this place. Nahardia was the new seat of the Davidic throne. This was also known as the area of pure lineage, where very strict laws were kept to preserve the throne of David. And this is where the area of pure lineage was, the area where Baha'u'llah was descended, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Well, in 457 BC, the prophet Ezra, that's not where Baha'u'llah is descended. In 457 BC, the prophet Ezra took a small band of Jews back to Jerusalem because King Artaxerxes put forth a decree which allowed the Jews to go back and begin rebuilding the city which had been besieged. But the majority of the Jews remained in Babylon along with the throne. Well, only Jesus' ancestors, who were of the seed of David but did not sit on the throne of David, returned to Jerusalem. Well, now that you know a little bit more about the line of Sarah and of Hagar, what about the line of Keturah? Well, the line of Keturah has a very important part to play in the course of God's 6,000-year plan. From Keturah's descendants in Iran came Zoroaster in 1000 BC. Zoroaster called himself the Middle Way, and this was because he came in the middle of a 6,000-year cycle, with there being 3,000 years before him and 3,000 years after him, until the year 2000 AD, when Zoroaster's prophecy that the earth is to be purified by fire and that the Shabaram, that the kingdom of the Shabaram will be established. Now, Zoroaster's name means seed of the woman, and Zoro is like the word zero, and Zoro actually means seed, just like zero means seed. Well, now, Zoroaster had no sons, he only had daughters. One of Zoroaster's daughters married the king of Persia, and from this lineage would be descended the Shabaram, or the king of glory. And the king of glory is Baha'u'llah, and because Baha'u'llah's name means the glory of the Father. And this is in fulfillment of Zoroaster's prophecy. In 226 AD came the Sasanian dynasty in Persia from Zoroaster, rivaling the Jewish prophecies that from the line of David there was to be a great and conquering Messiah. Sasanian king, Chosroes II, attempted to completely wipe out the house of David. In 598 AD, Chosroes II killed all the male sperm descendants of King David on down through Hanani. That is, all except for one sole surviving heir in the womb of Hanani's widow, who was pregnant at the time of his death. And his name was called Boztani. Now, with the coming of Boztani, we arrive at a very important turning point in our story, because with the coming of Boztani, the 3 branches are merged into 2 branches. The 3 branches of Sarah, Hagar, is merged down the middle through the line of Keturah. Now remember, it was Hagar's job to assist Sarah as her handmaiden, and so Islam was to assist and protect the throne of David. In 657 AD, Muhammad's son-in-law, let me get my little pointer stick out here. Muhammad's son-in-law, the Imam Ali, gave the daughter of the last Sasanian king, Yazir III, who was Dara, to Bastani in marriage. And then he gave Dara's sister Sharbanu to the Imam Hussein in marriage. Thus, we have the merging of the three branches into two branches. In 817 AD, the ex-wife Isaac ben Moses was converted to Shia Islam by the 8th Imam Ali al-Rida. Isaac ben Moses in turn converted hundreds of Jews to Shia Islam, and he moves the throne of David to Mazandaran, or Nur, which is where Iran is today, and where Baha'u'llah was born. And Nur means light or glory, and Baha'u'llah, of course, his name, Baha, means glory. So from the father to son descendants of David, seated on the throne of David in Mazandaran, Baha'u'llah is descended. In 1817 AD, Baha'u'llah was born in Tehran, Iran, as the son of Mirza Buzurg, seated on the throne of David, and his father was the Grand Vizier to the Shah of Iran. So thus Baha'u'llah inherited this throne from his father, and he himself was seated on the throne of David. From the spiritual line of imams in Islam, the Bab is descended and made his appearance as Baha'u'llah's forerunner on May 23rd of 1844. Now I'd like to recap that the purpose of Islam is a spiritual successorship, and the purpose of the descendants of Sarah, or the house of David, is that this is a physical male lineal descendancy. Now the Bab fulfilled prophecy as the return of the Mahdi, or the 12th Imam. So he was a spiritual descendant. Muhammad said that the 12th Imam, who came in 260 AH, would return 1,000 years later, and 1,000 years plus 260 is 1260. Now 1260, according to the Muslim calendar, is 1844 to the Christian calendar. And of course, this is when the Bab came. On April 21st of 1863, Baha'u'llah made his proclamation as the one whom the Bab had foretold in the Garden of Rizwan outside of Baghdad. Baha'u'llah is the return of Christ and the Prince of Peace seated on the throne of David. Well, now many people confuse the Prince of Peace with Jesus. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. How can people confuse this with Jesus? The only thing that could possibly pertain to Jesus is that Jesus was a son. It says, for to us a child is born, a son is given. Did Jesus bring a government? It says that a government is supposed to be on his shoulders. No, the only thing that Jesus said about a government was render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Was Jesus the Father? No, he says, I go to the Father, for he's greater than I. Jesus called himself the Son. Was Jesus the Prince of Peace? No, Jesus said, I come not to bring peace. Do not think that I have come to bring peace. I've come to bring a sword. And if Jesus was the Prince of Peace, which he wasn't, then he was the biggest failure in the last 2,000 years, because all we've had is war and bloodshed. Now, did Jesus sit on the throne of David? No, as I've shown you, Jesus did not descend from the throne, from the the king of David. He did not descend from the kingship. He descended from Nathan, who was not a king. And this is why he said, my kingship is not of this world. Baha'u'llah fulfills this portrait of the redeeming Messiah. Baha'u'llah brought a government, and he sat upon the throne of David. He's the Prince of Peace because he brings a practical solution for peace. And his government is called the Universal House of Justice. Baha'u'llah is the return of Christ, the Prince of Peace. Baha'u'llah fulfills the prophecies of all the world's religions. For instance, for the Hindus, he's the awaited ninth avatar. Baha'u'llah is the ninth manifestation. For the Zoroastrians, he is the Shah Baram, or King of Glory. Buddha spoke of the coming of the fifth Buddha, Amitabha. Amitabha means King of Glory. Buddha said that he was the first of 5 Buddhas to come. Counting Buddha, Baha'u'llah was the 5th Buddha, or the 5th manifestation. Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah. The Christians and the Shiite Muslims await the coming of the redeeming or the reigning Messiah, and this is Baha'u'llah, the return of Christ prophesied by Jesus as the glory of the Father. Baha'u'llah is the hope and the awaited promised one of all the religions. Shouldn't all the world be looking to Baha'u'llah? Because Baha'u'llah sat on the throne, Baha'u'llah's descendants are seated on the everlasting throne of David. Baha'u'llah had a son, Abdu'l-Baha, who had a son, Mason Remy, who had a son, Joseph Pepe Remy, who is the one seated on the throne today. Baha'u'llah brought a blueprint and a genealogy for the kingdom of God on earth. The kingdom of God is a government established in the most perfect form. Like the human form, it has a head and it has a body. The Davidic kingship today is the guardianship of the Baha'i faith, descended from Baha'u'llah, and this is the head of this body. The guardian of the Baha'i faith sits as the president of the Universal House of Justice, or its chairman. Now, as I've said before, it's Islam's job to assist and protect the throne of David. In fact, one imam said, we imams rule by leave of the house of David. So the 2 genealogies of Baha'u'llah, which is a physical genealogy, and of the Bab, which is a spiritual genealogy, are joined into one perfect branch by a man named Shoghi Effendi, by being a descendant of both the Bab and Baha'u'llah. Islam is united with the house of David and the genealogy of Shoghi Effendi, making him a unique branch from the twin holy trees. And Abdu'l-Baha even explains this. In the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha, he says, salutation and praise, blessing and glory rest upon that primal branch, Shoghi Effendi, of the divine and sacred low tree, grown out, blessed, tender, verdant, and flourishing from the twin holy trees. Abdu'l-Baha conferred infallibility upon Shoghi Effendi because he was this unique branch from the twin holy trees. Now, although Shoghi Effendi is descended from Baha'u'llah, he did not sit on the throne of David. Now remember, the throne is passed down from father to son. Shoghi Effendi was descended from Baha'u'llah on his mother's side, and he is a descendant of the Bab on his father's side. So he was not of the male line descendancy of Baha'u'llah. Well, now the throne is supposed to continue forever. The Davidic throne is supposed to continue eternally. So by appointing Shoghi Effendi as his infallible successor, this created a dual successorship, because there had to be a successor to the throne of David, as well as an infallible successor, Shoghi Effendi. And this successor to the throne of David, the successor of Abdu'l-Baha on the throne of David, was Abdu'l-Baha's adopted son, Mason Remy. Shoghi Effendi appointed Mason Remy as the president of the First International Baha'i Council. Thus, there were 2 successors side by side, Shoghi Effendi from the Islamic spiritual line through the Bab, and Mason Remy from the physical line of David. So Shoghi Effendi's successor, then, is an IBC. Okay, so as Shoghi Effendi had no biological sons as his successor because he did not sit upon the throne of David, Shoghi Effendi's successor was to be a body with a head in the most perfect form, but not a man. This body was a Davidic kingship as its head. This body was supposed to be a body made up of a legislative body with a Davidic kingship at its head, and this was the International Baha'i Council that Shoghi Effendi set up to succeed him. And this was supposed to evolve into the Universal House of Justice in 4 stages, as delineated by Shoghi Effendi. So Shoghi Effendi's successor, the IBC, is both a spiritual successor through the 12 appointed members and a physical successor through the guardian at its head who is descended from Baha'u'llah. The Universal House of Justice is to be an elective legislative body of members from every nation. And the way to tell the true Universal House of Justice from a false one is that the true Universal House of Justice will always have a Davidic king or guardian at its head. The promise given to Abraham and his 2 wives, Sarah and to Hagar, for the 2 great nations of Israel and of Islam is fulfilled in the Universal House of Justice, with the Davidic guardianship brought by Baha'u'llah at its head. The Universal House of Justice is the answer to the question of world peace, for only with justice can there be peace on earth. Baha'u'llah brought something that the world has never seen before, and this is justice. Each of the manifestations revealed something unique. For instance, Moses brought the law, Krishna brought detachment, Jesus brought love, Muhammad brought submission. Baha'u'llah brings justice, and this is unique. So in closing, the peace sign is a symbol of nuclear disarmament. The Universal House of Justice is the only solution to the problem of war. According to Baha'u'llah's plan, the Universal House of Justice with the Davidic throne at its head is to have all nations unilaterally disarm and settle their differences in consultation around one table. Isaiah foretold of the spiritual solution when he said, "And they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, and they shall learn war no more."
Thanks, Kay. We've got 5 minutes left in our program tonight, and we're opening the lines up, so get your calls in while you can. And while our number's flashing on the screen, I've got a few announcements. You'll be able to see a replay of tonight's program this Monday at noon here at MCAT. And as we go 15 minutes over, that'll be starting at 11:45 and not at noon. So that'll be 11:45 Monday. This program will be replayed. Now our guest for our next show next week will be Carlotta Giesen, who will speak on the Battle of Armageddon. And that will be Friday, April 29th at 7 p.m. here only on MCAT. Now for those of you who like to attend Sunday services and hear music and drink coffee and eat donuts afterwards and ask questions in person, we have worship services Sunday at 620 South 3rd Avenue West at the Baha'i House of Worship across from the Job Center. During these services, there's music, readings from the Baha'i writings, and a short introductory talk on the Baha'i faith. Again, that's Sunday at 10 a.m. at 620 South 3rd West, and everyone is welcome. Well, I see we've got our first caller on line 1. Hello, you're on the air.
Oh, I was just wondering, where would Jesus be from? Is he like from New York?
Where would Jesus be from?
Yes.
Could you maybe clarify your question a little bit more?
Like, where was his originality?
Jesus of Nazareth?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for calling. Well, his name is Jesus of Nazareth, and Nazareth is a town in Palestine or in the Middle East. Now, the return of Jesus and the birthplace of Jesus, of course, was Bethlehem. Now, this is a good question. Now, some people might think that this caller was asking a silly question, but It might not be as silly as you think that in the Bible, Daniel gives 4 dates for 4 appearances of Jesus. See? And the first one is in chapter 9, where he gives 490 years, or 70 weeks of years. But where is that going to be? Well, in the book of Micah, he tells us that he'll be born in Bethlehem, and Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Well, for the Jews, this appearance of Jesus, this first appearance of Jesus, he was behind a veil. They were unable to recognize him. And of course, he was crucified. Well, when he was crucified, it says the veils was rent asunder. But the Christians, although they're not behind the veil, they're able to accept Jesus. They know that he fulfills prophecy in the Bible, being born in Bethlehem. Unlike the Jews that are still veiled, they're still behind 3 more veils, which is the last 3 dates that Daniel gives for the return of Jesus. Well, the first Christians, the apostles themselves, asked Jesus in Matthew 24 when he's going to come again. And in verse 15, he says, so when you see Daniel speaking of the desolating sacrilege, let the reader understand. In other words, in the book of Daniel, where Daniel's speaking of the desolating sacrilege, standing in the holy place, he gives 3 more dates in chapter 12 of Daniel for the return of Jesus. 1,260 years, 1,290 years, and 1,335 years. In the same way we know that Jesus, on the first appearance, was born in Bethlehem, we also need to turn to the Scripture to see where these other 3 appearances of Jesus will be. Well, one of these, in John chapter 10, Jesus says, I'm the door, or the gate. Well, he didn't speak English, he spoke Aramaic. So door, gate is Bob. Well, in the book of the Bible, it says that this throne of God would be in Persia, and this is where the Bob came from. Then the next date is that for Baha'u'llah, and in Isaiah he's from Mount Carmel. And the third date is for Jesus the high priest after the order of Melchizedek, and his address is given in Zechariah chapter 6 between 2 mountains of copper. And the largest mountains of copper in the world is Butte, Montana, and Lincoln, Montana, in the Deer Lodge Valley. And in Zechariah 3 it says that this appearance of Jesus the high priest, we have the stone with 7 eyes before him, which is the old Montana State Prison. Okay, we've got another caller on line 1. Hello, you're on the air.
Neil, good evening. How are you?
Good evening.
I'd like to ask your speaker to clarify something. In one of the graphics that she showed earlier in her talk, the one that I'm speaking of is the tree, the symbolic tree that shows the lineage. There is a symbol on that tree at the very top of that tree that looks suspiciously like a swastika. Would you please explain the meaning of that symbol?
Sure. Let's put the chart back up. Thanks for calling.
Thank you very much.
Okay. He wants to know why the swastika's on there.
Well, that's interesting because a lot of people think that the swastika has to do with Nazi Germany. But it doesn't originate with Nazi Germany at all. It originates with Adam. And that is because Adam, the pure religion that Adam brought, was that the teachings of the one true invisible God would be carried out, I'm not sure if this is correct, but to the 4 corners of the earth.
Right. He's universal.
He was a universal manifestation. He's one of 3 universal manifestations indicated on the path of the flaming sword, a universal manifestation of Adam, Jesus, and Baha'u'llah.
That's great. That this symbol is a migration pattern, and the center of it represents the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is where Enoch, the establisher of Adam, made a book in stone. And this Bible in stone, or book in stone, in the interior of it is a chronological time scale where every day is a year. Well, the civilizations of the world at the time of Adam spread out from about that point. And we find the symbol of the swastika in China and in America. The Navajo and the Native Americans have it. It's also found in Africa and in the other parts of the world. Now, all the Western civilizations write left to right toward the Great Pyramid of Giza, whereas all the Eastern civilizations write right to left, the other way, toward the Pyramid of Giza, pointing back to the original origin of this. Now, in Carl Sagan's book, in which he talks about the destruction of the Earth by a meteor, he shows that if a comet coming into the atmosphere was to be seen directly above spinning, its tail would also make the same design as the swastika. Now, Adolf Hitler was a student of the Theosophical Society, which was started by Madame Blavatsky. And in the Teutonic or German peoples, this symbol was also passed down amongst the Teutonic people as Thor's hammer, they called it. And there's a book called Thor's Hammer, in which they talk about a comet striking the earth, and there's another one called Lucifer's Hammer and things like this. So what people have done is taken this ancient symbol and twisted it, such as Hitler did, to promote something that we're definitely against. So it's unfortunate that he would take a Navajo Indian symbol for peace and use it for this, but the one that he had is written in one direction, and it's backwards. And this one here is written in the opposite direction, which symbolizes the Navajo. Okay, I see we've got we have another question then? What line is it? Okay, line 1. Hello, you're on the air.
There's Waldo.
Oh, hi, Waldo.
No, where's Waldo?
Your name's not Waldo?
No, I said, where's Waldo?
Waldo's in the bookstore at the mall. There's a book called Where's Waldo, and on each different page they have a different picture, and Waldo's hidden amongst the different people in the book. So you can get Where's Waldo at B. Dalton's and also the children's bookstore. So, and Paul says in the book of Corinthians that when we were children we played with childish things, but now that we're mature we put those things away. Okay, that's all the things that we have for tonight. I thank our guests for being here with your talk, and I thank the citizens of Missoula for their questions and for tuning into our show. And if you want to know where Waldo is, like I said, you can go to the bookstore. And as for our message, which is more serious than that, we'll see you next Friday at 7 o'clock here on Channel 7 on MCAT. Thank you for tuning in. You didn't think I knew where...
Frustrated with run-of-the-mill national television? Can you relate to the characters? Do they look anything like your neighbors or anyone you know? Do the sitcoms, docu-fantasies, or bang-bang shoot-'em-up programs address issues in your life?
I did it!
Welcome to MCAT, Missoula Community Access Television, where the programs are created and broadcast by your neighbors. One of them. Hi, I'm Bruce Whitey, producer of Was That a Wolf, which just won an award at Best of the Northwest Festival. And I couldn't have done it without MCAT.
Hi, my name is Blue Tanteri. I made the video Montana Streams Worth Permitting. It's about the permits that you need to get to work on a stream in Montana.
My name's Gwen Hoppy, and I made the video Farmers Market that won an award at the Northwest Video Festival. It's for cablecasters, and I made this video for MCAT TV because I wanted to share kind of what I saw in the farmers market, which was...
MCAT works in three primary areas: production training, on-the-air programming, and community outreach. Come on in. Take a look around. Here at the studio, we teach people how to operate video cameras, be it in the studio, out in the field, or on a remote location shoot. But shooting a camera is just part of the process. Turning all that raw footage into a program requires editing. We teach you how to do that too.
Welcome to MCAT, and welcome to a bit of Missoula history. We needed 2 folks to come in tonight to hit the 1,000 trainee mark in MCAT's history, which is...
MCAT is open to everyone who lives in Missoula.
We've obviously done that tonight.
So far, MCAT has trained 1 out of every 33 Missoulians. MCAT is involved in 3 basic programming areas: government, education, and public programming. With government programming, MCAT brings the Missoula City Council into your living room every Monday night. And other meetings where decisions are made that affect your everyday life. Zoning and engineering meetings, just to name a couple. With education programming, MCAT broadcasts school board meetings and is available to schools throughout Missoula for training. MCAT also works with public programming, and that's where most of us come in.
John Sununu, you know, and he is probably going to be on his way out. Well, I'm trying out some new forms of transportation here, you know, to see if I could possibly get the job. Hello?
Welcome to Undercover, the show that looks between the covers of books by local Missoula area authors.
For those of you just tuning in, our show, Baha'i Phone-In Live, is different and unique from all other shows, standing in a category of its own.
So I said, you know, you call yourself a democracy, huh? And they require you to vote? We're not required to vote in the U.S. He turned around. He gave me this absolute ridiculing look. And he said, mate, he said, voting is a civic duty.
Well, what kind of people produce programs at MCAT? People who want to inform us. People who want to entertain us.
Owes me anything.
People who want to inspire us. People who want to make us think.
Because a lot of our fight has to do with legalities of the United States government.
And people in service groups that want the community to know what they do. MCAT not only sees itself as a training and broadcast facility, it also provides the additional benefit of functioning as Missoula's Media Resource Center. So come on down to MCAT. Enroll in a workshop. Get involved. Tell a story. Produce a program. Missoula Community Access Television. It's yours, and it's fun. Call now and be one of the first 25 people to enroll in the next training workshop.